it does for the outside world. This video purports to show the aftermath of fighting on the streets of Tripoli between pro- and anti-Gaddafi forces. It's been widely reported from the capital in Benghazi that gangs of yellow-hatted militia have been given free rein to move house to house in the hunt for the opposition. Gaddafi's tactics have enraged even those who know him well.
He's using mercenaries, not because he wants to use them, because he cannot use the army. He cannot use the armed forces of Libya because they are Libyans and they are faithful and honest people. They will not kill themselves, because killing their cousins and uncles and friends, it means that they are killing themselves. So he doesn't trust them. He doesn't trust even his own guard.
Video emerges all the time showing chaos and the danger which protesters often run headlong into. Here, for instance, there seem to be snipers on the roof of a building opposite. A small crack is heard and a man goes down, shot in the groin. Another rumour, again unverifiable unless it happens, is that Gaddafi has threatened to blow up his oil pipelines, which would bring havoc to the country, already beset by poverty, and would have ramifications on oil prices across the world. Charles Stratford, Al Jazeera.
US President Barack Obama has condemned the violence in Libya, calling it outrageous and unacceptable. In a strongly worded statement, the president said the Libyan government must be held responsible for failing to respect the rights of its people.
The suffering and bloodshed is outrageous and it is unacceptable. So are threats and orders to shoot peaceful protesters and further punish the people of Libya. These actions violate international norms and every standard of common decency. This violence must stop. I've also asked my administration to prepare the full range of options that we have to respond to this crisis. This includes those actions we may take and those we will coordinate with our allies and partners, or those that we'll carry out through multilateral institutions.
Well, the Secretary-General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, has called for an end to the violence in Libya, and this is what he had to say from New York.
We view the recent events in Libya with particularly grave concern. The current situation is unpredictable and could go in any number of directions, many of them dangerous. At this critical juncture, it is imperative that the international community maintain unity and act together to ensure a prompt and peaceful transition.
Well, we can talk now to Kath Turner, our correspondent, who is in New York. Kath, fine statements, and everybody was waiting for what President Obama would say, but on a human level, it's an awfully painful wait for those who have relatives in Libya and want to see very firm action.
Absolutely. So the president came out for the first time really to address the nation and the world indeed about what his country was going to do to try and stop the bloodshed in the United States. Very carefully chosen, did not mention Gaddafi by name or ask for him to step down, but rather had that phrase which has been coming out of the White House and the State Department, all options are on the table. In that sense, they would be starting to talk about sanctions, possible no-fly zones, similar comments as well here from the United Nations. But the bottom line is not any action yet. Both Obama and Ban Ki-moon have said we need to work together with our allies, try to get consensus, and the international community must move and talk as one. But finding that agreement between other countries, member states here at the United Nations, is going to be difficult. There is always resistance from certain countries that do not like to traditionally be seen to be meddling in other countries' affairs, lest the international spotlight be turned on their own country. So a lot of talk, a lot of rhetoric, but the bloodshed continues and still no real firm action, and Gaddafi is still clinging to power. So what's the roadmap in terms of the next few days or hours, certainly, of how diplomats are going to be acting? They've got the Human Rights Council meeting in the next few days. What can we expect from them? Because they've never really been able to act with a great deal of weight behind them. That's right. So on Friday, the United Nations Human Rights Council will convene. That will be a meeting of the member states there, and a draft resolution has already been released for consideration. It has already been criticised for, again, being too weak and watered down. Some of the terminology we've heard and seen before many times from the United Nations, strongly condemning, urgently calls for, decides to establish. These are the kind of terminology that the United Nations does seem to always put out. We've already heard reports that China, Russia and Cuba have been fighting these draft statements, making them weaker than original text might suggest. Same thing happened on Tuesday here at the United Nations with the Security Council. So there were draft resolution, though, supposed to come out on Friday. But again, where is the action? The United Nations says, well, we need consensus. It all starts with words and then you build up from there. But this is a body that is not used to moving quickly and indeed has a lot of roadblocks ahead before it can do anything meaningful in Libya.
Well, we'll see what happens in the coming days and hours. Kath, thanks very much for joining us from New York. Well, governments are scrambling to launch evacuations of their citizens in Libya. The Libyan government has provided limited cooperation. With 25,000 citizens in Libya, Turkey is mounting the largest evacuation in its history, while also fielding requests for help from other governments. The EU is evacuating 10,000 of its citizens by sea and air. India made plans to evacuate 18,000 citizens to neighbouring Tunisia and Egypt, but is still waiting for air and sea clearance. The US State Department says there are several thousand American citizens in the country, but it's not received permission to evacuate them via air charters. The first ferry with some 575 Americans was supposed to leave on Wednesday, but the departure has been delayed. Also, the Chinese state media service has reported that 30,000 nationals were in Libya. Greek ships headed to Libya are prepared to collect half of this number. Now, the European Commission says some 10,000 EU citizens will be evacuated from Libya. Meanwhile, Turkey, which has 25,000 citizens in the country, has mounted the biggest evacuation in its history. Foreign nationals who've managed to return have spoken of their relief. Neve Barker's been meeting Russians who fled as they arrived in Moscow.
Touching down in Tripoli, a French military plane arrives to evacuate foreign citizens stranded in Libya. Several nations have organised emergency flights.
We're taking every action to get the remaining British nationals in Libya out of harm's way. We're greatly concerned about the loss of life in Libya and their government's failure to protect its own people. Indeed, the behaviour of their government in launching attacks on their own people.
Plane loads of passengers are now returning to cities across the continent. At Frankfurt Airport in Germany, evacuees expressed their relief at being out of Libya. With ordinary commercial flights hit by cancellations, many describe the scene at Tripoli's main airport as desperate.
Today in the airport was an absolute chaos. Many people from North Africa trying to leave and get home, thousands, and that was it.
For many, the island of Malta has become the nearest safe destination for those fleeing the violence. More than 500 Russians are also on their way home, many of them specialists working in the oil and construction industries. They bring with them eyewitness accounts of the turmoil.
At night, they would sometimes shoot a lot. We wanted to leave in the morning, but there was a huge crowd, so we flew out at night.
Like many Western powers, Russia has been keen to establish a foothold in Libya. But as the nation descends into chaos, the only option left is to flee. Neve Barker, AlJazeera, Moscow.
Now, thousands of Libyans, many suffering from injuries, are rushing to the border with Egypt, hoping to claim asylum there. But for those